Sticking to his trusty nighttime routine was more than a little challenging for Mike, given the circumstance. The multiple obstacles stood between Mike and the normal flow of his bedtime ritual. First, of course, there was the fact that he was at work. He hadn't been hired to sleep. But to heck with that. Who was going to know if he was slept instead of watching the creepy monitors? Second, there were contents of buildings Mike was in. So much that he tried to convince himself that he hadn't seen the bluish-purple bunny move its eyes to watch him. He knew he had. If the bunny could watch him, what else could it do? What else could the other animatronics do? Mike had to assume they were powered down, but were they? Third, Mike wasn't tired. He was just too freaked out to be tired. But then, that's what the pills were for. Mike pondered these and other issues for an hour or so after he returned to the office. He also watched the office door, which he had locked. When nothing had come to get him during that hour, Mike had decided to stick to his well-established bedtime habits. But first, he dragged one of the filing cabinets, the battered one, over to the door. Looking again at the scratch of the floor, he wondered if he wasn't the first one to use the cabinet as a barricade. If so, what did the scratches mean? He didn't let himself to think about it. Returning to the desk, Mike stood at the chair. Not ideal for sleeping, but it had put his head on the desk. He couldn't make it work. Mike opened his backpack and started pulling out what he needed. Pills. Check. Bottle of water. Check. Cassette player. Check. Dream theory. Check. Alarm clock. Mike looked down at his watch. He decided to use his watch as an alarm clock instead of bringing his clock from home. He set his watch alarm now. Mike had a paperback book next to the cassette player. Then he took his pills. Looking at the door one last time, Mike shifted his gaze to the wall clock opposite to the desk. The hour hand was halfway between midnight and 1 a.m. Mike looked at all the monitors in turn. Parking lots, lobby, hallways, kitchen arcade, dining room, storage room, back of the restaurant, front of the restaurant, all empty, all quiet. Mike put his head down on his folded arms. He closed his eyes. Beside his bed, of course, there was one piece of Mike's mighty arsenal that he hadn't brought with him, the poster. But even so, when he closed his eyes, he merely saw the swaying pine trees. He heard the breeze, too. Drifting into unconsciousness, Mike twitched and frowned. Was that the breeze he was hearing? It didn't sound quite right. It sounded more like the static than a breeze, as if he was hearing the static amount of feedback coming through the speaker. Maybe an intercom. This thought almost derailed Mike's descent to dreamland, but the pull of the pine trees eminent was too strong. Mike ignored the crackling that mattered the soothing sound of the breeze. He let the pine trees drop him in. The scene was so familiar to him. The scene, however, didn't flow smoothly in Mike's mind tonight. It came in snatches. Grating trees branches. Orange toy airplane flying through the air. A spray of ketchup. How about some burger with that ketchup, hun? Mike's dad asked. Thump. Fizz. Mike's mom voice called out. Keep an eye on your brother. Frisbee whizzing. Car engine revving. 20-year-old Mike shouts, Garrett! Branches slap Mike's face. Black car zooming away. Garrett's pale face in the car's back window. Mike opened his mouth to scream, and for once the scream made it out with his mouth. Garrett! Mike watches the black car disappear around a bend. Then, Mike hears children laughing. The sounds come from behind him. Confused, Mike turns. 5 children stand in the middle of the now empty road. One of them wears a paper top hat. One has a paper bib tied around his neck. One wears paper rabbit ears on his head. One holds a paper hook. The 5th child, a blond boy with icy blue eyes, stands in front of him. The other children. He has no paper props. Mike stared at the blond boy. Who are you? He asked. How did you get here? The boy says nothing. In the privacy of Mike's vision, he saw the other children playing. For a moment, they seemed strangely abstract, oversimplified. They almost two-dimensional, like paper dolls instead of real children. As soon as Mike turns and looked at the children full on, though, the children were perfectly real. Mike shifted his gaze back to the blond boy. As if the focus transition, he gets the same cardboard cutout impression of the kids. Quickly retorting to look to the kids straight on, the flattened effect disappears again. Mike frowns, baffled. As bewildered as he feels, however, Mike has a little fire of adrenaline flickering in his belly. Whatever happening is new, different than anything he has seen before. Mike stepped toward the blond boy as he gestured back over his shoulder to where the car disappeared. Did you see that car? Mike asked. Did you see what happened? The blond boy studies Mike as if Mike was an ant invading a picnic. Mike tries again. Do you see who took my brother? The blond boy smiles. Beyond him, the other children are back in 2D. Like they step off the page of a book. Mike looks directly at the children. They're real again. Once, twice, 3 times, Mike adjusts his gaze, focusing, unfocusing, focusing, unfocusing, focus, unfocusing. The children turn to flat, tense images and then swell back into 3D. Finally, the children abruptly scatter. All 5 of the kids run. They go into different directions. Mike calls out, "Hey, wait!" He looks from one fleeing children to the next, trying to decide which one to follow. Mike decides the blond boy, who was just starting to disappear into the woods. Mike takes off at a full sprint. Pine trees flank at Mike's face as he's trying to keep the boy at his sight. He can see flashes of blonde hair through the branches. If he can just stay with that boy until they're out of the trees. Funk. Mike's foot hit a rock. He loses his balance and pitches forward, his body laying on the ground. Mike opened his eyes and discovered he was pitching forward out of his chair. His body flew towards the floor. His head cracked against the hard aluminum. Moaning, Mike put a hand on his forehead. He winced when his fingers pressed against the lump near the temple. Ow! Mike pulled his head back in the tender area. He pushed off the floor and managed to get on his feet. Just as he started to get his bearings, a shrieking beep started stabbing in the pain in his head. Mike scrambled at his feet and clumsily poked his watch, managing to shut off the alarm. He looked at the digital numbers. It was 6 a.m. Dropping back into the office chair, Mike slowly leaned forward and hit rewind his cassette. He picked up his paperback book and fluttered the pages absently. What had happened in his dream? Who were those kids? Mike robbed the sleep of his eyes. He flinched and once again encountered a bump of his forehead. Mike dropped his hands and looked around the office. It was as if he left it before and he'd gone to sleep, but something about it. Mike had never had a dream like that before. It couldn't be a coincidence that it happened when he was in this room. He thought about the dream, the kids, the top hat, the bib, the bunny ears, the hook. Had he just so weirded himself out of his fears that penetrated his dreams, or was something more going on? Mike's stomach was concrete with fear and confusion, but it was also fluttered. It fluttered with excitement. Was he on the verge of a breakthrough? The rising sun beams followed Mike through the door as he stepped into his house. The beam stretched out ahead of Mike and landed on Max, who was prone on her stomach on the sofa. The TV was particularly on QVC. Mike, his body feeling like it was buzzing, dropped his backpack and a white bakery bag on the kitchen table. He'd been so spun up what happened in his dreams that he spluttered and gotten donuts from the bakery at the grocery store. Chocolate ice, their sweet scent now combined with the lingering smell of microwave egg rolls. Mike didn't like egg rolls, but the fried smell was far better than any smell he encountered at the pizzeria. The pizzeria, Mike had thought the job was going to be nothing but a pain in the butt. Who knew it would have been such an effect of his dream? Mike hadn't felt so buoyant and... Well, he wasn't sure he never felt this way, at least not in 13 years. Max let out a soft snort. Mike stepped over to the TV and turned it off. Then he touched Max's shoulders, barely, just a brush against the dark purple fabric of her blouse. She raised her head with a snort, wiped drool off her mouth, and yawned. When she spotted Mike, she quickly sat and her fingers combed her long hair. Then she wiped sleep from her eyes. Mike's cheek looked flushed. He hoped he wasn't coming down for something. She was the best. Make that the most affordable sitter he found for Abby. How'd it go? Max asked. Mike thought again about his dream. He lifted one shoulder. It was interesting. Not the best job in the world, but I needed like a reference for a judge who might try and take. He waved a hand. Never mind. Max nodded, then quickly looked away from Mike. Weird. He never seen her act so skittish. You want a donut? Mike asked. No thanks. Max responded was flat. Weird again. Max wasn't exactly Miss Bubbly, but she was usually good for some sarcastic or sass. And she always looked at him in the eye. Why was she avoiding his gaze? Mike frowned. I do intend to pay you, you know, at some point. He picked up the donut bag. You sure you don't want a donut? Advance against your pay? He tried to grin. Max shook her head. She didn't smile. It's okay, she said. I know where you live. Mike chuckled. Max didn't. Mike gathered up her stuff. Max thought her posture was off. A little hunch. Maybe she was sick. You feel okay? Mike asked. Max startled. Her flush deepened. Yeah, sure, I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Something was off. Mike thought about pushing to see what was up, but he had his own stuff to think about. See you tonight, Mike asked. Max gave him a half nod. She looked at Mike and started to open her mouth. Then she closed it. For several long seconds, Mike and Max looked at each other. Out of the blue, and for the first time, Mike thought, Max is a pretty girl. Mike had always had too much going on to think about Max as pretty. She was just his babysitter. And now he looked like a babysitter who had something she wanted to say. Was she going to quit? Mike held his breath and waited. Finally, Max spoke. She's a really good kid, you know, she said. Huh? That was not what Mike had expected at all. What did Max mean by that? Mike didn't get a chance to ask. Max was already out the door. Abby's room was bright in early morning sunlight. She could feel it warming her closed eyelids, but she wasn't ready to open her eyes yet. Abby hugged Dolph close and burrowed deeper under the covers. She wanted to spend just a few more minutes with her friends. Abby could be with her friends when her eyes were open too, but sometimes it was easier to hang out with them when she was sleeping, or when she was going into or coming out of sleep. Abby heard Mike open her door and walked over to her bed. Not ready to talk to her brother, Abby pretended that she was asleep. Abby listened to Mike walking to her bed. She concentrated on keeping her breathing slow and even. The mattress dipped as Mike lowered himself to the edge of her bed. What is he doing? Abby couldn't remember the last time Mike had sat on the edge of the bed while she was sleeping for pretending to sleep. Tempted to open her eyes and find out what was going on, Abby decided to wait it out. She kept breathing slow. When Mike reached out and brushed a lock of Abby's hair from her cheek, she was sure she jerked a little. But maybe she didn't, because Mike didn't want to seem to notice. He smothered her hair and stayed where he was. Okay, that was enough. This was too weird. Abby opened her eyes. Hey, Abs, Mike asked. Hey. Abby looked at her brother. Something was different about him. He didn't look as tense as usual. He almost looked happy. No, not quite, but something. Mike stood. I need to grab a shower, then we can get you to school. Abby nodded. Mike ruffled Abby's hair. This was strange, too. He gave her a quick grin and left her room. Slouched in the corner in a gray velvet booth that smelled like lemon cleaner, Maxine put her shoulder against the adjusted window. The window glass felt cool through the mud brown top she put on just for this meeting at Sparky's Diner. The top felt appropriate. It looked dirty, and this meeting made Maxine feel dirty. Usually Maxine loves the aromas of diners. That distinctive mix of bacon and eggs and waffles and pancakes, breakfast foods and burgers and fries. Lunch far. She was probably one of the few people in the world who loved the smell of fried oil. Today, however, the food smells were making her feel queasy. Or no, it was why she was here that was making her feel queasy. Ignoring the controversial buzz and glasses and dishes and clanks and other chatter around her, Maxine stared at the window and watched the swelling black cloud rushing toward the sad, faded alkaline building. The cloud's shape was eerily skull-like, complete with what looked like a vacant eye holes and hungry mouth. The cloud had already consumed the bright sun that had dominated the morning, and now it looked like it was gobbling up the old, run-down, greasy spoon. A sharp elbow jabbed into Maxine's rib. She turned and frowned at her brother. Spade, she said. She didn't have to say more. Jeff understood her shorthand. He stood a few inches away from her. Even though Jeff was 10 years older, the two of them were close. When Maxine was little, both of their parents had worked 2 jobs. Jeff had been more of a brother to Maxine. He'd been something more to a surrogate dad, even if he was a screw-up at it. At 10, Jeff hadn't known squat about taking care of a baby. In the weeks before Max's mom's monetary leave had ended, Jeff had done his best. Even so, he lost his sister more than once, nearly drowned her, dropped her, scalded her, and fed her more candy than nutrition food. It was a wonder Maxine had survived. Sorry, Jeff said in a tone that made clear he wasn't. He picked up a paper scrawl and turned off the end of the wrapper. Pulling the paper back just a half inch, he put a straw in his lip and blew, shooting a paper wrapper up Maxine's face. It hit her in the nose. Maxine sighed and glared at Jeff. Age? Jeff snorted a laugh. He elbowed Maxine again, this time on purpose. Maxine sighed once more and shook her head. Movements from the other side of the table caught her attention. She looked across at the square pine wood table at the lumpy sitting of the opposite side of the booth. The man's name was Doug. Just Doug, he said when he introduced himself. Doug was supposedly a lawyer. What kind of lawyer only went by his first name? A scalzy lawyer, that's what kind. He noticed his dog was staring at her breasts as he slurped up at the cup of coffee, to which he watched him and add 4 more creams and 6 packets of sugar just a few minutes before. She merely lowered her gaze and crossed her arms over her chest. Total sleazeball, Max thought. What was she doing here? Maxine glanced at Jeff. He was sucking his soda nauseously. He could feel his knees bouncing under the table. He knew he felt not awkward as she did, but probably for a different reason. Maxine loved her brother, and she thought he had a lot of going for him, having gotten more than her mother's looks than her father's. Jeff's hair was sandy brown, and his features were small and balanced. His features, however, didn't fit his size. As a good-sized 6-foot tall, Jeff's body was too large for his small face. Even so, Maxine thought he was cute. He was kind, too. He had a big heart, Jeff, however, was the kind of bad choices. He was the king of the bad choices. He'd probably done time twice for relative minor stuff. Car theft, breaking and entering. He couldn't seem to hold on a job. She really shouldn't have let him talk her into this, or anything for that matter. Maxine already felt terrible about what she'd done. She didn't want to do anything worse. No, she wouldn't be here. Outside, rain started tapping at the window. Maxine nudged Jeff. Move, she said. She needed to get out here. Before Jeff could twitch, a clamorous crash cut through the normal dining. Maxine's head jerked to her left as she instantly sought the source of the sound. Jeff and Doug looked at the direction, too. Doug had to swerve his thick neck to look over his shoulder. Sparky's eating arena was arranged by a C shape around the kitchen, which took up a third of the building's octagon. The square-off counter crackled the cook's domain, from which came a constant ding of whistling, banging, and shouting, and booths lined the outer wall of the building. The door was at the end of the top leg of the C. The racket had cancelled everything else. In the diner was an explosion of broken dishes that apparently had fallen from the busboy's very full tray. The boy, actually a sad-looking 30-something guy who, prematurely bald, was mumbling something Maxine couldn't hear as he dropped to his knees to clean up the mess. Standing over him was a petulant woman with an ashy brow, no doubt from the box of pics of cut. Jane, Mike's aunt. Probably the defense of the storm kicking up the storm diner. Jane wore a pink pale pantsuit with matching high heels. She looked prim and proper, but Maxine she knew she wasn't. Hands on him, Jane deliberately stomped to the broken glass beneath her. She narrowly avoided the buzzy boy's fingers. Max had a feeling the miss was an accident. No, you watch where you're going, Jane screeched. She kicked the sharp broken at the busboy's shoe. The busboy glanced. She flounced away from him. Jane headed directly towards the booth Maxine really didn't want to be in. She couldn't escape, though. Now that Jane was here, it was too late. Nearly everyone in the place had frozen when they heard the dish explosion. Now most of the diners were returning to their food. Many pairs of eyes checked Jane's progress, though her diva-like dramatics were designed to put her in the limelight. She made a point to huff Frederick as she moved on. Her high heels made explicit tapping sound to the diner's scuffling burning linoleum. Jane reached the booth and sat next to Doug. Where she didn't have enough space, she shot Doug to look, and he appeared to attempt to let some air out of the balloon of his body. He squished himself against the window. Before anyone says anything, Jane said as she settled up, I have somewhere I have to be, so let's make this quick. A tall, lanky aroma Barentines, wearing a sparky uniform shirt and white hat of brown tied around his waist. Maxine knew that his name was Ness. He was Sparky's son. Approached the table. Hey there, Ness said. Welcome to Sparky's. Ness lifted up a head towards Maxine and gave her a little smile. She returned the smile. Can I start you guys off with some appa? We're not eating, Jane said. Well, that's no fun, Ness said. He leaned forward Jane and waved her a wink. You know what they say. Lunch is the most important meal of the day. I thought that was breakfast, Jeff said. He frowned as if he thinking hard of the subject. Maxine mentally shook her head. Her brother was a sweetie, but he wasn't all that bright. Some people say that, Ness said, but it's just a theory. He grinned. Jane narrowed her eyes and looked at Ness if he was Are you getting paid by the work? Jane said, or can we have a minute? Ness' grin dropped. So did the rest of his face. He shrugged and walked away from the booth. Jane curled her lips at Ness retreating back. Her lips were painted in the color that matched her paint skin. It wasn't a good look. Jane shifted her attention to her booth companions. Now, where were we? She asked. No one answered. Jane screwed Maxine with her best Cruella de Vil look. Oh, right, Jane said. You were about to tell me what a miserable failure you are. Before Maxine could open her mouth to tell Jane just what to do with herself, he jabbed the fingers to drink straight. Hey, screw you, lady, Jeff said. Maxine felt the urge of love for her brother. He was sweet and kind, but he always turned into a bulldog when anyone tried to mess with Maxine. My sister went over every inch of that 100 times, Jeff said. If there was something to find, he would have found it. He slapped a hand on the table. Now pay up. Jane raised an eyebrow at Jeff. I'm sorry? You said 200, Jeff said. Maxine, feeling unusually meek, probably because of the guilt that had been strangling over since she agreed to do what Jane wanted done, spoke softly. We had a deal, she told Jane. Jane tilted her head on one side and slid her gaze up and down Maxine's torso. Maxine had to keep herself from looking down to be sure she didn't have a strain or something. Yes, Jane said finally. The deal was that you find me hard proof of criminal endangerment. Something accountable. Instead, all I've heard is that what a nice kid my niece is, and how my nephew sleeps a lot. He really does, though, Maxine said. Jane banged a fist at the table. Jeff's soda glass glingered, and Doug's coffee splooshed. His little creamer cups and sugar packets hop across the table like starting frogs. Sleeping is not a crime, Jane styled. Head to the dining table and swerved to stare at Jane. She didn't notice or care. Jeff ignored Jane. His gaze was at Doug. Maxine looked at the lawyer. He was red in the face, and his eyes looked like they were trying to explode out of his head. Hey, dude, Jeff said to Doug, you okay? Doug moved his mouth around as if he was trying to work up a spit. I just realized, Doug said. He worked his mouth again, then cleared his mouth. I probably shouldn't be hearing any of this. I probably shouldn't even be here at all. He looked around wildly as if seek rescue. He began swooning towards Jane as if he could high-scoot her out of the booth and flee. Jane raised a hand up towards Doug. Stay, she commanded. Doug stayed. Maxine felt like he should have a treat or something. Jane looked at Maxine to Jeff. No one spoke. Maxine just wanted the whole thing to be over. She didn't even care if she got the money Jane had promised. She never should have agreed to search for dirt on Mike. Sure, Maxine needed the cash. She always needed cash. But yes, she was annoyed with Mike because she never bothered to really look at her, but... Well, I guess we're done here, Jane said. Unless neither of you have any bright ideas, which I do realize is unlikely. Jeff piped up. Why don't we just kill him? Maxine shot her brother a look. Was he serious? You couldn't tell Jeff was kind, yes. But he had a comic book view of life. They were his people and everyone else. Mike was part of everyone else. In Jeff's view, Mike might have been disposable. Doug tried to shove Jane out of his way with his big, soft shoulder. He half tempted to stand in the room. Jane immediately grabbed his tie, yanked him down, and used the flat of her hand to shove him back to the place. He didn't resist her. He retreated toward the window. Jane looked at Jeff with an expression somewhat similar to approval. Tempting, Jane said, but no. Not thinking about opening her mouth, Maxine whispered, his job. Jane turned towards Maxine and leaned forward. Speak up, honey. The word honey was a triple rap of sarcasm. Hating herself, but apparently unable to stop herself, Maxine raised her voice and continued. Well, Mike was saying how he really needs this new job, so he can look good at paper, like for the judge. Jane nodded. My nephew. The archeress. That's very fascinating, dear, but I'm not hearing a plan. Maxine glanced at Jeff. He returned her gaze, and he grinned. He looked back towards Jane. We tossed the place, Jeff said. Jane raised her eyebrow, clearly surprised that Jeff had said something semi-interesting. Go on, she said. Jeff shoved aside his soda glass and put both hands palmed together on the table. Mike's a security guard, right? His job is to make sure no one gets in. So, he looked at Jane, to Maxine, and back to Jane. We get in, mess the place up good, help ourselves with whatever we find along the way. Jeff lifted his finger and pointed at Jane. Your nephew gets canned. Judge gives you the kid. He hesitated, then leaned back and crossed his arms. And you give us the $2,000. Jane pulled her chin and gave Jane an as-if look. It's $200, she said. Jeff shook his head. $200 was for going through his underwear drawers. We're talking about breaking and entering, destroying private property, theft. That's like 5 years minimum. Probably more like 10, Doug inserted. Jane shot Doug a death glare, and then she tapped the pink painted table nails in the booth's tablecloth. The skin of the colored edges of her eyes peeled open up. 1,000, Jane said. Jeff looked at Maxine. She leaned away from him, attempting to fuse with the window, or perhaps pass through right it. She couldn't believe she was having anything to do with this. Still, she gave Jeff a muscular nod. Jeff looked at Jane. Okay, he said. Jane stood, adjusting the hem of her pant-side jacket. She bent forward across the booth table. She leaned close, just inches in Jeff's face. Maxine got a whiff of Jane's perfume. It was sharp and cutting, like it was a fusion of pepper and grapefruit. In low, menacing tones, Jane said, Do it soon, and don't mess it up. Jane twisted her lip. Do mess it up. She pointed at the table, but just don't mess this up. Jane stalked off. Doug helped himself out of the booth bench. Maxine watched Doug's trail in Jane's wake. Maxine looked at her brother, clearly confused. Jeff was looking at the spot of the table that Jane had pointed to. Maxine, fed up with everything, slapped Jeff's finger. He frowned at her, still baffled. She gave him her best moron look and sigh.